This year marks the 150th anniversary of the beginning of the Civil War. We felt it would be appropriate to have some type of program or presentation honoring the volunteers who answered their nation's call. The small farming community, not yet known as Morton Grove, answered that call with a number of young men, along with many others from the surrounding area. Let me first give you some background of those times and help set the stage for what was to transpire. And I will then share some information and resources for tracing back your own Civil War ancestors. The groundwork for the Civil War started much earlier than 1861, with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, John Brown's unsuccessful raid on Harper's Ferry, and the Dred Scott decision years before. Immediately after the 1860 presidential election, Abraham Lincoln and the new Republican Party attempted to hold the line on the expansion of slavery, and many of the southern states saw this as interference with the state's self-determination and sovereign rights. This was one of the many reasons that the first of the southern states would succeed and become the Confederate States of America on March 4, 1861. Lincoln and the federal government thought the secessionists would quickly reconsider and abandon their plans. But on April 12, 1861, South Carolina militiamen, loyal to the Confederate States, fired on federal forces at Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, starting a shooting war that would last 4 long years and cost over 650,000 lives. On April 15, 1861, Lincoln ordered the remaining states to provide troops to quell the uprising. The original request was for 75,000 men to support the small existing federal army. In 1862, when it was obvious that this would not be easy, it was increased to a call to 300,000 men. A large number of federal troops at the time were from southern states, and most abandoned their units and headed home to fight for the Confederacy, including Robert E. Lee, who resigned his commission to lead the Confederate Army. In 1859, it was Lieutenant Colonel Lee, as a Federal Army officer, who was instrumental in the containment of the raid on Harper's Ferry, and whose swift actions prevented the planned slave rebellion from happening. On April 16, 1861, upon receipt of the presidential proclamation, Illinois Governor Yates requested that a state militia be raised from every county and from the many independent militias across the state. At the time, many militia groups existed as private military units, sponsored by cities or towns, or rich merchants and bankers, or even fraternal and social organizations. They were to organize into companies and regiments, so neighbors and relatives fought in the same units, sometimes fathers with sons, brothers, or uncles and cousins. Healthy men between 18 and 45 who volunteered were accepted, as did some who were younger or older who wanted to fight for the Union cause. Whatever their reason, farmers set aside their plows, merchants closed their shops, all manner of tradesmen and unskilled laborer joined their local regiments. The 1st Infantry regiments numbered 7 through 17. Since 1 through 6 had served in the Mexican War, those numbers were not reused. Were originally enlisted for a period of 3 months. It wasn't until a year later that they extended the terms of service to 3 years. The final number of Illinois infantry regiments at the end of the war numbered 156, with 10 only serving for 1 year and 10 for just 100 days. There were 2 artillery regiments. The 1st and 2nd were numbered units, and the rest were independent batteries named for the sponsoring organizations, such as the Board of Trade, the Springfield Independents, Cogswell's, or the Mercantile Association. There were also 17 cavalry regiments. Each regiment was formed at the local level. They often supplied their own food, blankets, and weapons at the beginning of the war. Many of the well-to-do regiments could afford the best equipment and well-educated officers to lead them. The men elected their own officers, and often it was a wealthy landowner and not a professional soldier who would become the colonel or a captain leading a regiment or a company. By the end of the war, Illinois had sent almost 285,000 men to fight. All but about 3,500 were volunteers. It wasn't until later in the war, after July 1864, did they start conscription or drafting men into the service. But rather than going to Canada, you could legally pay a $300 deferment fee to avoid the draft, or provide a substitute to take your place. One name that figures prominently in the early history of Morton Grove, Beckwith Road was named for an early pioneer family that settled here, was Corydon Beckwith. He sponsored 21-year-old Henry Fink to take his place in Battery D of the 1st Illinois Light Artillery Regiment. Henry replaced Corydon in the draft late in 1864 and was mustered out in April 1865. His brother, 18-year-old August Fink, was also drafted in 1864 and served with Battery L of the 2nd Illinois Light Artillery Regiment until the end of the war. Medard and John Lochner, early settlers whose family still lives in Morton Grove, also volunteered. This is the only known picture of 25-year-old John. He joined Company I of the 13th Illinois Infantry Regiment on May 27, 1861, and was promoted to corporal on March 22, 1863. His younger brother, Medard, was with Company C, 9th Wisconsin Infantry Regiment, and was sent west to Kansas, Arkansas, and Missouri, then known as the Indian Territory. He was also promoted to corporal upon his transfer to Company A in April 1865. John fought at Vicksburg and was fatally wounded in the Battle of Lookout Mountain on November 24, 1863, and died in a hospital near Chattanooga, Tennessee on November 27, 1863. Medard survived the war and was mustered out on January 30, 1866. He returned home and held several positions in local government, such as postmaster, township clerk, and later as a township highway commissioner. Some other familiar local names with Civil War connections, like Henry Harms, who, as Niles Township supervisor, was appointed to help organize and meet the quota for 22 out of the 209 township men who were eligible for the service. And John Ottlinger, also of Niles Township, who served with John Lochner in Company I of the 13th Infantry Regiment. John Ottlinger survived the war and returned home to continue farming. We also found information on a few Northfield Township Civil War veterans, like Alphonse Schmidt, who was a private in Troop D of the 8th Illinois Cavalry Regiment. He fought at Sulphur Springs and in the Second Battle of Manassas. He's buried at St. Mary's Cemetery in a place then known as Shermerville, now called Northbrook. Also interred there are Jacob Rapp, Philip Arnold, Michael Hoflecker, and Michael Leese, all of Company G, 57th Illinois Infantry Regiment. There were also Niles Township members of Company G, 57th Illinois, such as Lawrence Schmitz and Henry Brandt, whose descendants still live in the area. Other Northfield residents who served during the war were Adam Ebinger with Troop K, 6th Cavalry Regiment, related to the Ebingers of Niles Township, all sons and nephews of Christian, Friedrich, and John Ebinger, who lived near the North Branch of the Chicago River at a place then called Dutchman's Point. Martin Ebinger was with Troop K, 17th Cavalry, assigned to the Department of Missouri at the end of the war, and his cousins, Jacob and Henry Ebinger, were with Troop I of the 12th Illinois Cavalry, also known as McClellan's Dragoons, part of the 1st Union Regiment to engage the Confederate forces at the Battle of Gettysburg on July 1, 1863. Henry was transferred to Troop B and promoted to sergeant before being mustered out in 1865. A lucky find for a collector, since the photo of Henry Ebinger was signed on the back. The 12th Cavalry was at New Orleans later in the war, where he had this picture taken. Adding this type of provenance increases the value of the find, and it locks in important information like who is the person, and when and where was the picture taken. For those who know where Myers Tavern is on Lake Avenue in Wilmette, also in Northfield Township, just east of Harms Road, both Henry and Christian Meyer, a father and son, served with Company G 57th Infantry Regiment. They were part of Sherman's March to the Sea with Captain Gustav Bussy and his brother Frederick, or Fritz Bussy, who was lieutenant of Company G and was wounded at the Battle of Shiloh on April 6, 1862. Their family is well known in Elk Grove and the surrounding area. One member of the family went on to become a mayor of the city of Chicago. But Bussy Road and Bussy Woods were named for other notable family members, their father Friedrich and Fritz's son, William Sr. A lot of interest in the Civil War has been generated lately, with the next 4 years being an important anniversary for some famous battle somewhere. Most people have seen the Ken Burn film on PBS, or the series on Abraham and Mary Todd Lincoln, A House Divided, or maybe saw the movies Gettysburg or Glory. Where exactly does one find out about such history? There are many sources of information available. I want to spend a few minutes talking about how and where to do your own research for any family members that might have served during the Civil War. Family Bibles and old photos passed from generation to generation. Any written history on the fly pages, inside the covers or margins, or on the backs of pictures can be valuable. And yellow documents found sitting in an old trunk in the attic, or a relative's journal or diary. Stories told by grandparents. My generation of late baby boomers would probably be the last with direct access to the grandchildren of the Civil War veterans. We started this quest back in April of this year, looking for the histories of Morton Grove's Civil War soldiers. And the place to start was the U.S. GenWeb Project, a website that provides a starting point for amateur genealogists. From the U.S. GenWeb site, you can drill down to the state level. IlGenWeb is the Illinois site. They have a quick link on the left-hand launch ribbon for Civil War searches, so it saves a lot of time rather than drilling down through the site to get to where you want to go. There is a very well-constructed site from the Illinois Secretary of State's office. They have all the copies of the Adjutant General's muster rolls and pension lists for all of the Illinois volunteer regiments from the Civil War, as well as links to other database sites. You can get to all sorts of state records from here. Some are directly accessible online, and others are still hand-searched, and you just order copies of the documents through this site. There's another popular Civil War site run by the National Park Service, the Civil War Soldiers and Sailors System, listing all soldiers and sailors from both sides, and you can order copies of their service records from here as well. This is where you would either start a search or confirm what you found at other sites, as the information is taken from the original muster rolls, payroll, discharge, and pension records, so it would be a more complete and accurate source. Ancestry.com is one of many pay-to-use websites. There are many such sites, but the source material all comes from the same place. Good free sites like genealogytrails.com or Random Acts of Genealogical Kindness, RAGK.com, a volunteer-based group that will do research for you in their local areas, including visiting libraries and courthouses or photographing cemetery markers. They all have the same basic information available to them and links to other websites with some partial family histories already started by others. Most volunteer-run sites ask that if you find any new information to contact the administrator, and they will add it so it can be made available for others to use. This is the Genealogy Trails top site, structured much like the U.S. Gen website. It allows you to drill down to the state site. Genealogytrails.com started out as a resource just for Illinois at first. Then they added the surrounding states and now have information from all 50 states online. From the state site, you can drill down further to the Cook County site. One nice feature is the ability to take it down even further to the township level. Here is the Niles Township site, where we did some of our research for this project. And the Northfield Township site, where we found a lot of information on our boys from Company G, 57th Illinois Infantry. It's like peeling back an onion with all of the layers. There is quite a bit of information available. It's just being able to sort through it and organize it and find what's important without getting sidetracked. With the cursive handwriting and use of abbreviations, Sometimes it's hard to read the original documents, and many mistakes get copied from site to site, so it's always best to verify your findings against another source. The state-run website was hand-transcribed before flatbed scanners, so every document was read with human eyes and manually retyped into the database, which explains some of the spelling errors and missing information. The time frame you'll be researching would be that of your great-great-grandparents, your grandparents' grandparents. They would have been born in the late 1830s or 1840s and died as late as the 1930s. Having a location is also critical, as there were fewer named cities and towns, and people came from the countryside, so a county or township name is often how they identified where they lived. If you lived in this area in 1860, you would be known as from Dutchman's Point if you lived in what is now Niles, or the area around Waukegan, Milwaukee Avenue, and Touhy along the Chicago River, or from North Branch if you lived at Waukegan and Glenview Roads near the Chicago River, or perhaps Niles Center, which is now Skokie, if you lived around Niles Center Road and Oakton and Lincoln Avenue, or, as it was known back then, Miller's Mill Road. Northfield Township was divided into, quite simply, North Northfield, West Northfield, East Northfield, and South Northfield. Or today it would be parts of Glenview, Northbrook, and the village of Northfield. Even if they lived in one township, they may have enlisted in another adjoining township. Again, using John Lochner as an example, he was from Niles Township, yet enlisted in Jefferson Township, which is now the Jefferson and Edison Park neighborhoods of the city of Chicago. Birth, marriage, and death records from the county courthouse or local church, along with the 1860 census records, can help narrow down your search to see if you have found someone in your family. As with most farming families having 5 or 6, or even 9 or 10 children, the possible number of heirs grows almost exponentially with each succeeding generation. While you may not come up with a direct descendant, the probability of locating a brother or cousin of your great-great-grandfather is still possible. Old newspaper clippings can be valuable for background information. Some people keep clippings for special events like weddings or birth announcements, or even the obituaries can help make sense out of who's related to who, and what was the order of birth or death. Sometimes even finding out the names of surviving relatives can be a great help. If it is an unusual last name, not like a Smith, it should be quite easy to track down. People in smaller farming communities often emigrated from the same parts of Europe, and once a group with somewhere in common was established, others would soon follow. And sometimes families would invite other relatives to join them here in America. This explains how a number of families with the same last name can exist in one small area. They were all related somehow, and each may have had multiple children. The Ebinger clan is a good example. Christian came first, and then invited his 2 brothers to join him once he was established. This area was originally settled by families of British descent, like the Beckwiths, Whites, and the Dews, before the Germans came in the 1850s. They were mostly from the region around Trier. New Trier Township is named for that region in Germany, and then the settlers from Luxembourg followed them later. Another resource is visiting local cemeteries and church graveyards from the period. There are a few websites that list the occupants of most of the larger cemeteries in Illinois, and in 1929 the state of Illinois commissioned an honor roll listing where the known Civil War veterans were buried. Or even if your hobby is just visiting old cemeteries to read tombstones, these can be valuable resources to help put a Civil War veteran's life into perspective. Rolls Hill Cemetery on Chicago's north side has a large number of Civil War soldiers buried there, including 12 generals. St. Boniface Cemetery on North Lincoln Avenue in Chicago has a monument to the Civil War soldiers buried there, mostly of Swedish and German descent. Or Oakwood Cemetery on Chicago's near south side, the site of Camp Douglas. You can also find Civil War veterans at the smaller, older cemeteries, like Calvary Cemetery in Evanston, St. Joseph's in Wilmette, or at North Northfield and Northfield Union Cemeteries on Dundee Road. Closer to home, there are St. Paul's Lutheran, St. Peter's Lutheran, and St. Peter's Catholic cemeteries in Skokie. There are fraternal organizations that exist to keep the memories alive, such as the Sons of the Union Veterans of the Civil War, the GAR. Educational groups like the Salt Creek Civil War Roundtable, reenactors like Battery A of the Chicago Light Artillery or the 1st Michigan Engineers, or just collectors who specialize in Civil War artifacts. All know something of the history and can be of great assistance to a beginning family genealogist. There are many internet sites that can be used, and for more information you can also check out the local library or historical societies. 2 books that are of great help and used in the research for this project were Dyer's Compendium of the War of the Rebellion and Shelby Foote's The Civil War. Both are available online and still in print. We hope you enjoyed this program on Morton Grove's part in the Civil War and found the research information helpful for finding your own family's Civil War roots. We remember the Lochner's and the Finks who, while not war heroes or Medal of Honor winners, all stepped forward when called to serve their country, as our own brave men and women still do so today.